I've seen things you people wouldn't believe. Just what do you think you're doing, Dave?
Why, you stuck-up, half-witted, scruffy-looking nerf herder.
This means something.
I am Locutus of Borg.
I must not fear, and fear is the mind killer.
Get away from her, you
Nerd! Nerd!
I'm Matt Kressel.
And I'm David Mercurio Rivera.
And
this is
Nerd Count. I'm Matt Kressel, and I'm here with
David Mercurio Rivera. Hey, Matt.
And this is the
Nerd
Count podcast. We got to get better with the timing, Dave. I don't know. What is this? This is going to be, by the time we air this, our 6th podcast. I think we could do better with that. I don't know.
And what was the sign-off we used at the last podcast? That was all.
Good night, nerds.
Yes. No, we had to change that. Because first of all, it's not night, right? It could be any time. People could be listening any time of the day.
So what do you say? Good day or night, nerds? Good
Farewell.
diurnal cycle?
I like the farewell, nerds. That's pretty good.
Farewell, nerds. There you go. Thank you, Kat. That leads us to our episode today.
Yes, I'm really excited today that we have one of the most renowned writers today in the spec fic community, the amazing Cat Rambo, and I'll read you her bio. Cat Rambo's 300 plus fiction publications. Did you get that? 300 plus fiction publications include stories in Asimov's, Clarkesworld Magazine, and the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction. In 2020, they won the Nebula Award for fantasy novelette Carpe Glitter. They are a former 2-term president of the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America. Their most recent works are space opera Rumor Has It, which we're going to be talking a lot about, and anthology The Reinvented Detective, co-edited with Jennifer Brozek. So welcome, Kat.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
Great.
Kat, you're our first guest on the podcast, so we're really happy to have you. And I think it's very appropriate too, because David and I have known you for quite a while, I think, right?
Boy, I'm trying to think of how the heck we met, but it seems like I've known you forever, Kat.
It's through Chris Dykman, and when Chris went to Clarion West, and then she and I got to be buddies, and I think the first time I came to New York to visit her, I met you all.
Okay, yes, that's right. And also, I was trying to think, I know we published you way back when.
Yes.
Garage number 4. We're talking about
two issues of Sybil's Garage. I had 2 different pieces, and oh my gosh, I love that magazine because I've shown it to people, and I've been like, it's like, here's issue 1, here's issue 2, here's issue 3. Because while the first one was great, it's just like the quality level just keeps going up and up. I thought it was just beautiful.
Yeah.
Thanks. By issue 7, it was basically an anthology.
It was gorgeous. Yeah.
For those who don't know, Sybil's Garage was a zine, which is, you don't really see too many of them anymore. At least maybe I'm not on the scene as much. But it was just like sort of a home-produced magazine right at the time that sort of self-publishing or indie publishing started to get easier to do with not that much money. There were a lot of smaller magazines that popped up. I think one of the most famous, probably, which is still around, is Lady Churchill's Rosebud Wristlet by Small Beer Press. But there was like Say magazine. I think, was that Christopher Rowe did it? Electric Philosophy, John Klima. It was a bunch of them. So we had started one called Sybil's Garage in 2003, and it ran for 7 issues until 2010. And we published Cat, and we published a lot of people who went on to do pretty amazing things. Paul Tremblay had an early story with us.
It's funny seeing those names. Like we were picking just random people from the slush pile that we enjoyed, and a lot of them turned out to be big names.
Yeah, AC Wise is in there.
Good slush pile philosophy.
They're all free. But anyway, so back to Cat, you had 2 stories in there. The first was An Appetite for Love, and number 4. What was the other one? I'm blanking on the other one.
The Lonesome Poet's Trail, I think, was something like that.
Okay.
Well,
it's
And
funny
he
that
did
was my
really,
friend.
the illustration for that was gorgeous. Sorry, I keep talking over you.
No, that's okay, Kat. An appetite for love. It's funny that from the very beginning, I mean, you're seeing a theme that runs through a lot of your work, which is cooking.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Are you a cook?
I am both a cook and a big foodie. And I love reading about cooking. In fact, I just finished up, I'm finishing up an online class called Eating Your Words, which is all about writing about food. And I had so much fun putting it together because I got to go into the science of taste, which is much more interesting and complicated than, I'm sure you would expect it to be complicated and interesting. It depends on how interesting one finds that sort of thing.
No, it is interesting.
I've come to cooking late in life. I was just sort of this, my philosophy used to be just put something in a pan, heat it up, and it'll taste good. Um, I kind of went back to basics. I sort of taught myself, and I was like, well, what's the
Yeah.
base flavor? Going back to the base tastes, and most of it still involves a lot of butter. But
Yeah.
yeah, I've gotten better at it. By the way, the story you had was in Sybil's Garage #3 called The Lonesome Trail, and
Oh,
all of those are available, by the way, at our for free at senses5.com, SENSESFIVE.com. If you search on the site, you could download all those issues for free and you could check
yeah.
out Cat's stories.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, go ahead.
Kat, you mentioned that you went to Clarion West with
Mhm.
a friend of ours, Chris Dykman, a member of our writers group. I'm wondering, why don't you tell us a little bit about your experience at Clarion West? How was that? And who were your instructors?
It was awesome. And my first instructor was Octavia Butler, which just
Wow.
sort of blew me away. And then we had Andy Duncan and L. Timmel Duchamp, Gordon Van Gelder, Connie Willis, and then Michael Swanwick at the end. So it was a
So,
really
so
lovely
nobody's is
group.
what you're
Oh
saying.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Wow. I mean, that's insane. I mean, that's just like a roster of heavy hitters. Was it how much writing had you done before that?
I actually had a master's in fiction writing from Johns Hopkins, where I had studied. I was one of the last people to study with John Barth. Um, so I'd had a lot of I had a certain amount of literary fiction written, and published in teeny tiny literary magazines. But when I went to Clarion West, it was the first time I was like, yeah, I'm going to write fantasy and science fiction. I'm not going to fuck around with, magic realism or anything like that. I love reading fantasy and science fiction, and it's what I want to write. So that was what I started doing.
And did you find that environment difficult?
Oh,
Like, so a lot of people I know went to Clarion and they describe sort of a kind of um emotional breakdown. There's that occult magic thing, salve et coagula, right? Or I'm not know if I'm pronouncing it. The idea is like you break everything down to its constituent parts, and then you rebuild it back up again. And a lot of people I know who've gone to Clarion, they hit like week 3 or week 4, and then they're just like they're done. And they come back from Clarion either with a completely new perspective on writing and they're totally like, it blew my mind, or they just stop writing altogether.
oh yeah.
And I'm just wondering what your experience was like there, because I've been to a workshop where it was like 1 week and it was pretty much just critiquing. We weren't writing, but I couldn't imagine doing that for 6 weeks. Can you
Well,
talk about that a little bit?
so, and I had been through the Johns Hopkins Masters in Creative
Hmm.
Writing. So I'd done workshop before. And I got to say, literary fiction is a unhappy, neurotic, fiercely competitive space. And science fiction, by comparison, is so kind and so nice and so supportive. And I am one of those people who generally, if you tell me I can't do something, I will try to figure out how to do it. So one of the things that happened to me at Clarion West was at the parties every Friday night at Clarion West, there's this party and kind of hobnob with the teacher and local folks. And people kept coming up to me and they go, oh, Clarion West breaks some people. And I'd be like, oh, what do you mean? And they'd be like, some people never write after Clarion
Mm.
West. And I was like, well, I quit a job at Microsoft in order to come to Clarion West, and my spouse is paying the mortgage, and I don't think he's going to be super sympathetic to the idea that Clarion West has broken me, and I now need to spend 3 months playing World of Warcraft to recover. And so when I came out of Clarion West, I kept writing a story a week just to prove to myself that I could do it, and kept working on a novel, and just kind of, I didn't give myself. I don't know. I don't want to sound like I decided not to get broken and therefore did it, because I know sometimes people get broken and it's not their fault. But I'm resilient and arrogant, and so those qualities carried me through.
So you said that you continued writing a story a week after
Mhm.
that, and then like you have an enormous number of published stories, 300 plus, as we said in the beginning, you know, longer works as well. You're also very active teacher. You teach writing classes. You were former president and held other roles for SFWA. Um, how do you do that? I guess is my question. Like, how do you maintain such a prolific um, output?
Well, so I don't do SIFWA anymore, or at
Hmm.
least I do, like I volunteer for like the mentorship program, which I love, and that sort of thing. Um, but I put that energy in the school. And I do think one of the pieces of advice that I give to my students and mentees is that you do want to sort of monitor where you're spending time. And if there's something that you're spending a lot of time on, that's not super rewarding, you want to kind of think about it. And I just had a wonderful mentee through SIFWA, and she is a writer of color. And one of the things I said to her is, boy, this industry will take the labor of particularly women of color and just chew you up, because she was editing an anthology for free for some classmates, and I was kind of like, so why are you the one doing this, and I don't want to say, I think volunteering is important and doing outreach and all of that stuff is important, but that's part of the thing that you want to meter and spend. And so like when I was working on SIFWA, that was my only volunteer work at all, and other
Yeah.
people would come and be like, do you want to serve on our board? And I'd be like, oh, I'm so sorry, and I think that's a good philosophy. Figure out where you want to put your volunteer time, where you want to put your energy,
Yeah.
um, because otherwise, this ecosystem runs on volunteers, and they will chew you. It will chew you up if you're not careful.
I also feel like today, especially, um, social media is like a huge time sink.
Yes.
And it's so easy to get caught up in it
Oh
and
yeah.
caught up in all the drama that goes on sometimes. I mean, there's real issues in the world. I'm not trying to
Yeah.
minimize
Yeah.
any of that, but I think that it's very easy to get suckered into that as a
Oh
as a
yeah.
kind of procrastination.
I I can resist Twitter because like I'll set a timer and be like, I'm going to be on Twitter for 10 minutes, and then because I will forget and I'll just space out otherwise. But
Mm.
TikTok is the thing where I will sit there scrolling. I'll be like, oh, I like these people and their little dances. Let me go work my way through their oov of little dances.
And 3 hours later, yeah, you haven't
Yes.
written much. Yes,
Yeah.
I've been there.
I don't do TikTok. I have various family members that do, and
Yeah.
something about those like Alvin and the Chipmunk type sounds, they do like the compressed audio. It's like nails on a chalkboard for me. Like I have to literally leave the room.
Yeah.
Yeah, so TikTok doesn't work for me. But
Hey, Kat, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about, you mentioned a lot of your time now is spent on your school, and is this the Rambo Academy for Wayward
It
Riders?
it is, and it's one of the things that I'm doing right now is actually shifting it around a little.
Mhm.
And I had been bringing other people in to teach, and quite frankly, right now the market is surfeited with online classes, and different workshops are giving classes, and it's wonderful. I mean, it's absolutely wonderful that that's happening, but they're all undercutting me, which means I can't pay my teachers the way I used to, which is totally cool because time moves on.
Mhm.
But what I'm doing right now is I'm going to continue to do classes that I teach, but I'm sort of leaning into the fact that it's a community, that we have a Discord server that has like over 100 people on at any one given time. And so, and we'd have a short story discussion group that meets twice a month. We have a craft book discussion group that has been we just finished up a Don Moss book, and we just started a new one. We have a kind of like motivational goal setting sessions. And so that's the thing I'm trying to emphasize right now is that it is a writing community where you can come, and it's a critique club, swapping story critiques. And so I want to kind of emphasize it's an online community more than a school, or it's a school with a large community
Yeah.
aspect. I don't know.
Yeah, no, that sounds really like a lot of fun, and it sounds pretty exciting. How could people sign up for these courses if they want to participate?
They can, if you go to academy.catrambo.com, you can find out how to either join through supporting me on Patreon, which is easy and automated, or through a PayPal subscription. Um, and there's also information on there about scholarships. And because I try to bring, one of the things I always did with the classes was I had 3 scholarships in every class that were just sort of needs based. And you didn't have to give me facts and figures. You just had to say, hey, I really want to take this, and I think it'll be useful to me because of this. Um, so I still do a lot of Discord memberships and that sort of thing for people that think it would be helpful but can't afford it.
And how did you get into teaching writing?
How did I get into teaching? Well, when I was in grad school, I taught, and I taught for Hopkins this really weird class called Contemporary American Letters, which basically involved let's teach a book by every member of the department, which I still think is kind of shady. Um, and then I taught for Towson in their women's studies department. And then after I'd come through Clarion West and I'd had some stories published, Bellevue Community College came and said, would you teach a part-time class? Actually, my friend Louise Marley was teaching it, and she wanted to kind of hand it off to someone she knew was a good teacher. And so I did that for a few years. And then at some point, I looked at my paycheck versus the brochure of what kind of they were charging the students. And I was like, whoa, this is a vast discrepancy. I mean, not like vast discrepancy.
Yeah.
And it was at the time that Google Hangouts had just come out. And so I started doing online classes with Google Hangouts. And I rode Google Hangouts from day one up until the day they closed the shutters.
Yeah.
Wow.
I remember those days.
Yeah.
So you also mentioned that you've held some offices at SFWA, the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers Association, right? So can you tell us a little bit about that, like how you got involved in those roles and what it was like?
Yeah. I had been I always feel like volunteer, that was where I was putting most of my volunteer work. And I was the head moderator of the discussion forums, and I dealt with a lot of what my mother would call strong personalities while doing that. And that also involved, because sometimes there were problems working with the board. And Stephen Gould came and said, look, Rachel Swirsky has to step down as VP, I believe it was, and we need somebody to be vice president for a year. And so I came in And while I was there, there was a lot of shit that was falling by the wayside. There was a lot of stuff that was just like nobody was taking care of it. Um, and part of it was that SFWA was in the process of transitioning from kind of a little bit of a clubhouse to an actual nonprofit corporation because it was
Yeah.
reincorporating in California and
Yes.
it was changing a lot of stuff. And so uh, I was I stuck around because I wanted to get I started launching changes and then I was like, well, I'm going to run for president because I really would like to see this still done. And then I ran for a second term because I was like, a lot of this stuff still needs to get done. And I helped get SFWA through bringing the indie writers on board,
Yes.
which was a big change and really opened the door for a huge amount of other changes. And there's a lot of stuff that uh, there was a lot of stuff that had gotten broken, not through anybody's fault, but because there wasn't anybody who was kind of looking at big picture stuff.
Right.
The grievance committee, kind of early on, and when I so the grievance committee I had to work with as vice president, and I became convinced that they weren't answering all their emails, and I kept contacting the head of it, and I was like, "Yeah, I don't think you're getting every email, dude." He's like, "Oh no, I am. You know, like how could you, even think this?" And finally, I went to our computer person. I was like, "Hey, just let me in on that mailbox because I just want to look at it."
Yeah.
And I go in, and there were emails in there from 4 years beforehand that were not getting touched because this guy thought that everything was directing to his personal account, but it wasn't.
Oh no.
And so, I mean, like, and so basically, I mean, the good thing about that was I I didn't fly off the handle when kind of letting him know, and I wasn't overly smug when letting him know. And so after that, he kind of respected me and understood that I did understand, I was technical, I was a computer person, I did understand what an auto response was, and so yeah, there was a lot of sort of wrestling with people's egos.
Did you
There's a lot of
find that? Yeah. I'm sorry. Finish your
no,
thought.
there's a lot of older science fiction writers that are used to being the most liberal person in the room. And unfortunately, while that was true like 40 or 50 years ago, or 20 years ago or whatever, it may be slightly less true just because the world has changed,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
things are different.
Yeah. I imagine that in that role that you had to sort of walk a tightrope in terms of like respecting the fact that these people have been around for a while, they're venerated, they've done a hell of a job, but
Yes,
they might not necessarily be doing the best job for this particular
right,
moment. And
right.
then you have to both tell them that, and then the people on the other side of that who are not getting their grievances addressed are like, what the hell's going on,
What's going
Cat?
on?
And then
Yeah.
you have to both respect them and respect this person. I imagine that it sounds to me like politics. It sounds to me like a lot
It,
of
it, it
Sure
was.
does.
It was. And at one point, somebody referred to me as SFWA's designated old white dude handler. And the truth was there was more of that than I would have liked, but it was also sort of part of the job.
Yeah,
Right.
I mean, I think that certainly, I mean, even like I started writing about 20 years ago. I think Dave, you're the same.
Mhm.
And even in that 20 years, I've just seen a massive amount of change.
Oh God, yeah.
And you can still see that there are some folks, whether they're publishers or writers, etc. And, if you've been paying attention online recently, one particular old person
Yeah.
who won't be
Yeah.
named, who are just unwilling to accept that things change.
Well,
And
yeah.
also have some particularly ugly views, in my opinion. But what were you going to say?
Well, I think the fact of the matter is with a lot of those voices, is kind of in the past, and still they have to be so much better than the norm. Whereas in the past, there was a lot of kind of cronyism and kind of like so and so wants to write, and so he and I will write a book together. And uh, those so I do developmental edits, and I edited for a renowned science fiction writer at one point, and I was just like, this novel is mediocre, and it's not a novel that if a person of color had written it, they would be publishing, right? And I just so I feel like the minority voices, like you read like the latest Nebula book, the Saint of Bright Doors, and it's just so freaking amazing and good and just sharp as a tack. Um, yeah, I just science fiction is getting better and better all the time, and it is some of these guys I don't think want to admit that they couldn't compete nowadays.
Yeah, it just seems that they're like there's a certain mentality among certain older folks that things worked a certain way for them in the 80s and 90s maybe, and they're just angry that it doesn't work that way anymore
Yeah.
and not willing to sort of adapt.
And it's ironic, right, in the science fiction community where
That's it.
we're talking about
It.
progress in the
Oh
future
God.
and advancements that there's that mindset that still exists.
Well, and it's interesting because like with science fiction, they predicted so much kind of the hard science stuff, but it's still when there's like soft science fiction, everybody's like, oh my goodness, and it's just it drives me nuts.
So you said earlier that you came kind of from a quote unquote literary beginning. Um, I've seen it changing as well, but I also still see that among the literary types, there is still sort of this denigration of science fiction and fantasy as if it's not literature. It's not
Yeah,
capital L
yeah,
literature.
yeah.
It's genre, using that word in a
Exactly.
derogatory way. And like, I always just find that kind of fascinating and amazing. And then I'll point out Samuel Delany, Ursula K. Le Guin, like people were doing this forever. And they're like, well, those aren't science fiction books. Those are literary books. And
Yeah.
that just really upsets me because it's like, okay. But like, what's your take on that, I guess, from, you've been doing this for a little bit of time. I mean, have you seen a shift in views towards science
Well,
fiction?
Daniel Abraham wrote a wonderful piece called A Love Letter from Genre to Literary Fiction, which came out online, I want to say like 10 years ago, which I always point people towards. Um, Two things. And one is genre is partially about where to shelve books in the bookstore, right? It's about, categories and the fact that people who like books with spaceships, by one person are probably going to like a book by about spaceships by another person. Um, but there is a trend in any genre of kind of comfort reads and sort of like the Harlequin romances or the Louis L'Amour or and science fiction has those too, right? We have the big fat fantasy novels that have flaws, but we love them. And I like nobody's going to argue that Robert Jordan is high literature. I mean, it's good, competent storytelling. And so I think sometimes people assume that escapist stuff can't be good. I mean, does that make sense? Am I making
It
sense?
does. It
Yeah.
does. Yeah. I mean, I always also find that the term escapist is also sometimes used in a derogatory way, but
Mhm.
like, um,
Yeah, one of the things that
yeah,
upsets me is when a writer will say, when they've gotten big enough where they can kind of deny their roots and say that, I don't really write about fantasy or science fiction. I write about real people with real emotions. As if though the genre doesn't have that. I mean,
Oh,
it's
I mean,
bad
yeah,
it's
science fiction,
loaded
bad
with
fantasy.
it. It's loaded,
Yeah.
especially the short fiction today. I mean,
yeah,
it seems to me that most of the stories are full of characters with complex, feelings and emotions, the quote unquote interiority that they
yeah.
talk about all the time in literary circles. It's chock full of that. But
Oh,
anyway,
yeah.
I'm going on a little bit of a rant here. Um, so you were saying that
But
as your role, oh,
sorry to interrupt, Matt, before we leave the topic of SFWA,
yeah.
I'm wondering if, I know that one of the things that I always, when I started writing years ago, one of my goals was I have to get into SFWA. I have to make my qualifying sales and get in. And I'm wondering, Kat, if you can just talk to the listeners out there about, what are the advantages of being a SFWA member, and why should people join SFWA?
So I actually am not currently a member because I've disagreed with a couple of policy decisions.
Okay.
But I do think it is a super useful organization. I think for like one of the things it produces are the model contracts. And the
Mhm.
model contracts are, for example, like a magazine contract that you can download and you can look at it, and it's got the clauses marked in different colors, and it tells you like, hey, if it's this red one, push back on that.
Mhm.
And I think that is a super useful thing. And that, like the mentoring program, I still do.
Mhm.
The mentoring program is amazing. There's a lot of resources on its website. It has the grievance committee. It has the emergency medical fund, and it has community on its Discord server and discussion boards. So I think it's got a lot of really useful stuff for new members.
You could also vote on the nebulas,
You can
which is
vote
a
on the
big one.
nebulas.
Yeah.
It's got a new it release newsletter that members can take advantage of. It's got a regular newsletter, the Singularity, they can advertise their readings in. Yeah, lots
Hmm.
lots and lots of good stuff.
Are there any particular like kerfuffles that you'd like to talk about, or if you'd rather not, that's totally fine. Because you were there for a while and you probably had some uh, you know,
Yeah. You don't have to, Kat.
points of view. No,
No,
there's
it's
no
not,
But,
pressure.
well, no, I will say that getting the independent writers in was a maybe the most difficult struggle SIFWA has ever faced,
Hmm.
and B, one of the smartest things it ever did. And one of the things that was really interesting was you had the older members. Like we had one older member who's like one of his qualifying sales was a flash story on a coffee label. Because I don't remember that used to be a pro sale. And so I'm not going to say anything more like about things he said because I don't want to identify him. Um, but like he was just like, oh, these, pixel stained techno peasants and that sort of thing. And
Hmm.
when we got the indie writers in, there was a thread where some of them were posting the numbers that they were making, like X number of dollars per month. And man, when they started doing that, suddenly people sat up and were paying attention
Yeah.
because these were people who were, making substantial livings off it. And
Well, yeah.
yeah,
I mean, so a lot of authors actually got started, big authors, self-publishing. John Scalzi, Kelly Link,
yeah.
Becky Chambers, Andy Weir. Um, I'm sure I'm forgetting more, but there's like so many big authors that you like, if you actually look, they started by self-publishing,
Yeah.
which is pretty
Yeah.
amazing. So
Yeah.
I have one big problem with SIF. And my one big problem is they canceled the Millen Swill. The Millen Swill.
Oh, the fucking Millen Swill.
I
Oh,
love
God
the
damn it,
Millen
Matthew.
I
Swill.
loved it
I
too. I
know,
used to
I know it
always
was so
go.
expensive. So for listeners who don't know what the Millen Swill was, it was this annual get together, basically like a mini ball where
It was
all
very
the
good food
writers
and drink.
with, yes, food and drink. Usually, it was open bar, right?
Open
Or
bar,
open bar. They had like trays full of hors d'oeuvres, and people
very
would just
swank.
very swank, and it was like 2 or 3 hours on an evening, usually held in Manhattan, a couple times at some nice places, and it was like this one night of like getting together and like basically a convention in like in like miniature. It happened in
And
like three
there were
hours.
all sorts of agents and editors and publishers there. That was one of the big things about it, was a chance
Yeah,
to mingle with them. It was okay. That event was so expensive.
yeah.
You have no idea. Well, you probably have some idea of how expensive it was.
Oh yeah.
And there was also there were people would get hammered. And they would just you like, and I remember like Bud Sparhawk, like the next day, because he was the treasurer when I was president. And he's like, I had to carry Norman Spinrad home last night, and I'm just like, dude,
Yeah.
I don't want to know.
Oh my.
I remember once it was after a Mill and Swill, because it's open bar, everyone's throwing them back. And then
Yeah.
afterwards we went to another bar that had like whiskey tasting.
Oh yeah.
And
Oh
when
yeah.
we were throwing back whiskeys, and those were fun. I know they were
They were
super
fun.
expensive. I know they were super expensive, and my idea was to like, just charge. I mean, and then you could have like a scholarship or something for folks who have limited means, who can't
You
make
should
it.
pitch it to
Yeah.
SFWA. If you
Yeah.
volunteer to make it. See, this is what will happen
Oh,
is
I'm
you'll
not
pitch it, and they'll
volunteering.
be like, "Yes, Matthew, come and do this for
No, I
us."
know. People have said that to you. Oh, Matt, you should run a convention, or you should, take over such and such magazine, and you should do this. I'm like,
Yeah,
nope.
yeah.
Like you said earlier, time. You have to choose your
You
time
have to choose.
wisely.
And
Yeah.
like one of the things I did in recent years that's really made me appreciate that is I organized a writing workshop last year in a castle in Spain, and this year in
Right.
a yoga retreat in New Mexico that is fabulous. And the 2025 location is out of the US, and again, very fabulous. And I'm just going to say Island Sun for people that are intrigued. Um, and that is just so much work. I mean, it's a
Yeah.
lot of fun, and I could not do it without my incredibly able business partner. But holy cow, just dealing with people's diets and personal crises and transportation, and just I don't that's it. I'll do that. I'm not going to do
Yeah.
it for SIFWA. I'm not going to do it for the local convention. I'm not going to do it for my
Right.
church. Or yeah.
Understandable. Yeah.
Well, when we were editing the magazine, I remember like I'd had to literally stop writing and pretty much stop doing anything else except my day job and the magazine for about 3 to 4
Yeah.
months.
Yeah.
And after a while, I was like, if I ever want to be a full-time writer, well, I mean, I have a day job, but if I ever want to take this writing seriously, I don't think I could do both. I mean, I know some people who do edit and write, I found it too much.
I think
Yeah.
it's very easy to burn out as a writer. And
Hmm.
I think kind of one of the things that women in particular are encouraged to do is give their time to other people. Or, if you're a good person, you give your time to other people, right? And I think writers have to learn to be a little selfish about stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. No doubt about it. So we should probably get to the subject of Cat's novels. I mean,
Oh
Yeah.
gosh.
Yeah.
I mean, you've been tremendously, prolific with. Your first series was a fantasy series, right? The Tibet series.
The Tibet series, and I've just finished up the final book of that.
Oh, wow.
So look for that in the next year or so, and that will be nice because then I can sort of stop working in that world. Although I'll still write stories in it, I'm sure.
Wow.
Um,
Why don't you just briefly tell us like what the premise is of
Oh,
that?
so Tibet is it's a city where there are intelligent magical creatures like centaurs and unicorns and minotaurs and stuff like that, and they're basically enslaved, and that is presumed to be the natural order. And sometimes they're even their bodies are used for magical and potions and stuff. And it's a point in time when those creatures are questioning whether that actually is, the natural order. And so it's kind of this moment of a city in revolution, and then there is a gladiator, kind of ritual gladiator, who gets involved in a scandalous doings and gets exiled. And yeah, it's a kind of It's a fun fantasy world.
That sounds so familiar. Was this based on a short story that you wrote a long time
Oh
ago?
yeah, I've written
Because I
short
remember
stories
this.
in this world. I've written, I want to say like at least a couple dozen short stories in this world. So yeah.
Yeah, I do remember that. That's a great premise. And this is the fifth book, right, in the series coming out soon?
This is the fourth that's coming
Fourth.
out.
Okay, that's fantastic. And then, of course, I mean, I know that coming out very soon in the next month, I believe, is the third book in your Disco Space Opera
Disco
trilogy.
space opera. Yes.
Why don't you talk about, why is it called the Disco Space Opera trilogy and the
So
titles of the books and the premise?
I've got basically 10 books planned, kind of mapped out in my head for this, and this is the third one coming out. This was a book that I originally wrote to self-publish. I had failed to sell a regular novel via the traditional agent approach. And so I sat down and I wrote the first book over the course of a month following this sort of insane regime where I was getting up at 5:30 in the morning and I'd go work out while listening to space opera music and thinking about the book. And then I would come home and write in kind of in 30-minute sprints until noon or so. And I would avoid the internet. I would not look at my phone. I would not look at my email. And I think that was really key. And so like over the course of a month, I wrote the book and I was like, oh, this is pretty good. And I took it to my agent and said, hey, I'm going to self-publish this. Do you want to sign off? And he was like, whoa, hold on a moment.
Mhm.
And I was glad that he did because he did sell it to Tor, which was awesome. And I'm hoping that Tor continues to buy more in the series, but I will write them either way because I love these characters.
Is
The,
this your
the,
first publication with Tor? Have you published with Tor before for
I had
novels?
published on the Tor website, on
Yeah.
Tor.com way back in the day.
Hmm.
But yeah, You Sexy Thing, which was the first book of the series, was my first Tor book. And I named it You Sexy Thing, which is the name of the ship. And then I always had it in my mind that just because the first book was a disco title, that I would make all the titles disco titles. But I didn't tell Tor that. I just titled the second one Devil's Gun, which is another song I like. And then when it was time to title the third one, I was like, well, by the way, all the titles are disco songs. So of course this one is Rumor Has It. And they were like, okay, because like whatever, cat.
That's one of my, by the way, that's one of my favorite songs. You Sexy Thing by Hot Chocolate.
Oh yeah,
That's
so
a
good
great
by Hot
song.
Chocolate. Yeah,
What's the
Nice.
You Sexy Thing is the sentient bioship,
it
which is the main
is.
character in the story. Tell us the
It,
premise of the novel.
so basically, there is a group of former mercenaries, space mercenaries, that have established a restaurant called The Last Chance on a space station, and they're doing very well, and so well, in fact, that a restaurant reviewer is about to come and perhaps give them a coveted Nicolin orb. Um, and then a mysterious package arrives, things start exploding, and they're forced to steal this intelligent ship that is not really convinced it wants to be stolen.
Hmm.
And that is how the book starts.
It's an interesting premise to have a kind of a space opera combined with a restaurant book as well. I mean, I know that one of the early elevator pitches, I think, for the book, or maybe just some critic called it a combination of Farscape and the Great British Bake
Great
Off.
British Bake Off. That was Tor came up with that, and it is. I mean, I love food, and I mean, and I love cooking it. I like reading about it, as I said, and so I was gonna lean into that. And part of the fun of the series is coming up with just weird ways to eat. Like in the second book, there is like they're eating this thing called Velcorin cuisine, which is actually based on this bizarre, wonderful restaurant I went to in Chicago that was molecular gastronomy.
Hmm.
And one of the desserts were these balloons, and they came out and they were filled with helium, and they were like made out of like sour green apple taffy, and you had to
Yes, I heard
inhale
about this. Yeah.
balloon. Yes, Ellen was there, Ellen Datlow. It was
Yeah.
amazing. And so that's what this cuisine is basically kind of like these balloons filled with scented nutrients.
It's
That's
amazing.
pretty cool. And then the most recent book, rumor has it, is you said it's coming out next month from
It's
Tor.
coming out September 24th.
Okay, awesome. And
Tell
then
us,
tell us about that.
yeah, tell us about
So
some of the characters are absolutely. It reminded me, and just I read the first 30 pages of
So
the
the
most recent
characters
book.
are Nico is a captain, and she's kind of the guide, the person who sort of drives a lot of the action. Her sergeant Dabry is a large four-armed humanoid with, and he's the one who's like super enthusiastic about cooking. And then they have Geo, who is a intelligent kind of augmented chimpanzee, Skidoo, who is a kind of squid-like, very amorous creature. There are two teenage were-lions, Talon and Thorn, and there is a reptilian prophet who utters one of the lines that I ended up doing a button of this because people had underlined it so much. But it's permission to speak of doom, Captain, and he is
Mm,
one of the people driving
nice.
things.
Great line, great line. And you know, when just from that brief description, it reminds me a lot of two things. One is Starjammers from the X-Men
Oh
comic,
yeah. Oh yeah. Oh, I
and
love Star Trek.
Guardians of
Yep.
the Galaxy. That kind of that ragtag group of space adventurers. So it's very you know, cinematic, and I could easily see this as a some sort of a TV series
Oh, I would
or
take
film.
that so much. Yeah.
So, Kat, you mentioned earlier you were considering self-publishing, and then your agent's like, no, 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 we need to sell this, and then did sell it. Do you have experience with like both obviously traditional publishing, but also self-publishing as well? And
Oh yeah.
I was wondering
Yeah,
if you could
because
speak a little bit to that.
one of the first books I ever did was Jeff Vandermeer and I collaborated on a little collection, and we put it together. Um, and I published a couple of books on writing. So it's very handy for me, like when I'm at a convention, to have a stack of books that I can sell that are on writing for people that have come to my classes or whatever. And I put all my I've done a couple of collections, basically. Like I did one called Altered America, that's all my steampunk stuff.
Hmm.
And that's you know, people like steampunk, that's a good one for them to pick up. But um I have never mastered the art of marketing that a really successful self-publisher needs to really make it, I think. I have two friends actually who write together, and they write very quickly. They do a book a month, and they look at the market, and so they like look, you know, hey, in this niche, let's look at the top 100, and let's look at kind of like what are the characteristics of the books in that top 100 that are kind of like really doing well in, say, you know, like vampire, assassin, erotica, whatever that niche is. And they go like they've been right. They wrote a series of Amish stuff. And they said right now they're writing Christian stuff. And they just kind of they're geniuses at marketing. And you can make a super, I think, decent living on Kindle if you're somebody who's willing to kind of pump out the series and do the kind of, because there's a lot of readers on Kindle. I'm one of them, where you find something that you like and then you just binge, you know, 12 of the books because they were so enjoyable.
Well, I
Yeah,
tip my hat, I guess, I guess to writers who were able to do that. I just wouldn't be able to write in that way. You know,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
tough to just see a concept and say, I'm going to write that vampire assassin book because it's hot.
I think I could do it for a while, but I don't think it's sustainable for me. I think there'd be like around the third or fourth month, I'd just be like, I fucking hate this. I hate this so much. I hate this world. I hate these characters. You know, like I did, like was it Arthur Conan Doyle trying to kill off Sherlock Holmes? And like, Reichenbach Falls, you know, just
right. Yeah, I mean the marketing thing I think is true even if you're not self-publishing. I think even if you're just a traditional publishing. And more I see a lot of authors doing hybrid, you know, where they're doing some
yeah,
trad, some self.
yeah.
But it's like the whole marketing thing now is, I think it's even harder than it's ever been because it's so fragmented. I mean,
Oh God,
you
yeah.
know, just this morning, I was posting about one of our uh, episodes, episode 4, and I think I published it on 5 or 6 different
Yeah,
social media sites.
yeah,
And then I was like, well, I also have my newsletter I could put it up, and I could put it up
yeah.
on my website. And it's like, it's it's really, really hard
Well,
to sort of get attention.
I think if you really want to be effective at it, you have to kind of have a flow chart where you're just like, okay, I've done this piece and now it's going to go on these platforms and now it's going to go in the newsletter and that newsletter gets propagated to this. And I think, I wish I were better at scripting because I keep thinking, well, I should take a class on scripting because I do think a lot of this stuff could get automated. It's just such a pain in the butt, right?
Yeah, it really is. I mean, if there are any entrepreneurs out there, if you want to automate, you know, writing, advertising, no AI, please. Um, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey,
Um,
Kat, I have a question about, I mean, you ran through all of that, the list of really fascinating characters from your Disco Space Opera trilogy. And I'm wondering, from a technical point of view, on podcasts, we talk a lot about just the technical aspects of writing. When you have that many characters, how did you decide point of view? Why did you decide to do it the way you did rather than going maybe just
Oh.
jumping from one character to another and doing 12 points of view? What was the thought process behind that?
So the original impetus for the book was Anne Leckie wistfully saying in a class that she was teaching for me on space opera, I wish someone would write a space opera in omniscient point of view. And
hmm.
I said, challenge accepted. And so when I started writing, I knew it was an omniscient point of view, but I don't feel like I really understood omniscient point of view until I really started writing in it and exploring it. And then I taught a class on writing omniscient point of view, which is for me one of the best ways to figure something out is to teach a class on it. Um, and I am convinced that omniscient point of view is the most powerful, elegant, everything you want to do point of view of all time. I love omniscient point of
It's very few authors actually write an omniscient these days, but it was I was reading or rereading Dune for a
view. Oh
podcast,
yeah.
different podcast, and I had to rewire my brain again because it's written in omniscient point of view. And so it's like, mid sentence or mid paragraph, you're switching points of view. And um we really don't do that anymore. And it's interesting how that's shifted.
Well, you
So
don't,
yeah.
you know who does it is both Douglas Adams and Terry Pratchett.
Mm.
And I think because it is really well suited for humor and those kind of sly asides at the expense of characters and all of that, which is really, and sorry, I cut you off there.
No, I mean, I, I just find it interesting the whole, how the genre shifts, and I don't know if that was even like a conscious shift necessarily. Just all of a sudden now everybody writes in either third or first person and close third and very rarely omniscient, if at all. I've seen a lot more second person stories.
Yeah. Yeah.
This leads me into one more question. It's more of a curiosity thing than anything. I'm always interested in writers like your specific writing process. So I know everyone's got their own way that they write or when they write or how they write. Is there anything that you do that you'd like to talk about, like a specific technique that you have or
Well, yeah, actually, one of the things I do, which is very useful when you're doing kind of writing sprints, which is it like you set the timer for 20 or 30 minutes and just go, is um if I'm having trouble, so there's that kind of writing mode where you're writing the words on the page, the words of the story, and perhaps you're having trouble, and I will drop back a level and start describing what's going to be going on in the story. And so instead of writing the actual words, I'll be like, well, then they're going to go into the tavern and they're going to see this, and this is going to happen, and this is going to happen. And I find that if I'm doing that, then at some point, kind of the engine kicks back in and I go back into regular writing mode. And so that's what helps me kind of keep going fast.
That's fascinating. It's fascinating because we, Matt and I did a podcast about outlining versus kind of free form writing.
Yeah.
And both of us have kind of adopted a hybrid form of writing. And that sounds exactly like a hybrid form where you're kind of, in a sense, you're outlining when you're saying that this happens, this, and then you go back into the actual writing. So that's fascinating.
Do you outline your books before you write them?
I outline after I have written the first third, I outline the second third and I write it, and then I outline the third and I write it, and then I go back to my outline and I use it as the main revision tool.
Have you ever been asked to write a synopsis before the book was written?
Yes, and it's painful. And yeah, but I mean, one of the things that's kind of freeing is like a older and much well, not older, but a much more significantly published writer said to me was you don't always have to stick to the synopsis, just produce it, and synopses change. And I was like, oh, okay. I think it was David. Yeah,
it's liberating. So I think we're coming up on almost about an hour, so we should probably wind down a little. We've talked about a lot of different things. Is there anything, Kat, that we haven't mentioned that you would like us to talk about?
Oh gosh. I will mention, if this is okay to your podcast listeners, that I also work with a podcast called If This Goes On, Don't Panic, which is a hope punk focused podcast. That Alan Bailey is the main driver behind that.
We can edit that out, right, Matt?
Yeah, we'll just cut that. No, Alan is I haven't spoken to Alan in a while, but Alan's a great guy, and I think
awesome.
I think I've been on that podcast.
Yeah.
It's been a while, but yeah, no, it's a good podcast, and Alan's a good host. So
I've been around for 4 years now, which is
that's great.
So that's great. Yeah,
I noticed you mentioned the something called the Reinvented Detective anthology.
Oh yeah, that's a series that I've co-edited with Jen Brozek, and the first one was The Reinvented Heart. So it was all science fiction stories about relationships, but not necessarily romantic ones. Like we had a lot of platonic or friendships or pet and stuff like that. And the second one was The Reinvented Detective. So it was all crime and punishment sort of stories. And I don't know if the publisher is going to let us do a third one, but if they do, we're going to do The Reinvented Coin, which is Jen picked The Reinvented Detective, and I want to do The Reinvented Coin because I think economics is super interesting.
Fantastic.
So you're obviously like a Renaissance person. You're doing a lot. You're doing amazing creative things. Where is the best place that people can go to find your work?
If I'm actually I'm getting a new website at the end of August, so I will say the website will be super cool. But you can find me on most social media as Cat Rambo, except for Instagram, where I am Spec Fic.
Okay.
I believe I'm Cat Rambo too, but I've forgotten the email attached to that one.
Okay.
All right.
Well, thank you, Kat, for appearing on the show and discussing your work. It's been a lot of fun.
It has been delightful. Thank you
for being our first guest. Yeah, it's so great to see you. It's been too long. Will you be going to World Fantasy?
Not World Fantasy. I will definitely be at Worldcon in Seattle, though.
Okay.
So
terrific.
All right. Well, hope to see you, if not in person, definitely online.
Awesome.
But we should do our farewell nerds. Do you want to join us, Kat?
Yes.
So it's 3, 2, 1, and then farewell nerds.
All
Ready?
right.
3, 2, 1. Farewell nerds. All right. You've been listening to the Nerd Count Podcast. That's our show. But if you want more shows, check us out at nerdcountpodcast.com or your favorite podcasting site. See you next time.
Get those nerds!